Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we are going to take up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 9th of September 2021. The articles which we are going to take up today has been displayed on your screen. Before we begin the discussion, we have a very important announcement for those who are taking Prelims 2021, which is scheduled on 10th of October. The third test in the series of pre-parikshan will be live tomorrow, that is 10th of September. It will be live until 12th of September and it will be followed by live discussion and result declaration. So please register yourself on ELEARN platform to attempt pre-parikshan for free. Also, the weekly mains answer writing assignment for this week has been uploaded on ELEARN platform, the link to which shall be provided in the description of the video. The question for this week is, highlight the threats posing India amid China's expansion of its nuclear arsenals. The question needs to be written in 250 words. All those students who submit their answers by Saturday will get their assignments evaluated by the faculties of RAU'S IAS for free. Let us now begin the discussion. So the first article which we are going to discuss today appears on page number 1. Amid protests, Centre hikes MSP for Rabi crops. So just yesterday, government has increased the minimum support price for wheat for the upcoming Rabi season to Rs 2015 per quintal. That is a 2% hike from the earlier MSP. And the government does this for most of the crops before every cropping season. Now MSP or minimum support prices is one of the ways through which government tries to incentivize agriculture, to keep the farmer afloat and to remunerate for his or her hard work. At the same time, the grains acquired at MSP is actually the grain which is distributed under PDS or public distribution system. Now this topic is very important from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination. For example, in 2019, UPSC had asked, the economic cost of food grains to the Food Corporation of India is minimum support price and bonus if any paid to farmers plus A. transportation cost only, B. interest cost only, C. procurement incidentals and distribution cost, and D. procurement incidentals and charges for godowns. Now I'm not going to tell you the answer because the answer lies in the discussion. Not just that, the public distribution system also forms the part of GS paper 3 under main syllabus because issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies and minimum support prices, public distribution system objectives, functioning, limitation and revamping is a part of your syllabus. And UPSC sticks to syllabus because again in 2019, UPSC had asked what are the reformative steps taken by the government to make food grain distribution system more effective. So you can see that this topic is important for both the stages of examination, prelims as well as the main stage. And so go through this discussion where we are going to start by first understanding the mechanism or the framework through which the grain is finally delivered on the gates of the beneficiaries. And then finally, what are the challenges which the public distribution system is facing. And try to solve this previous year question in prelims and mains and see if you were able to do that with this discussion. And so let us now first understand how does a bag of grains reaches the beneficiary starting from a farm. We know that farmers do not directly go to the beneficiary. That is not an option, right? And so it exchanges a lot of hand before it ends up in the hands of beneficiary. And so of course, the first stage in the long chain of events is done by FCI, which is called procurement of grains. Food Corporation of India exchanges these grains in return of minimum support price or MSP. So the food of grain is given to FCI and in return, FCI gives the farmer MSP. And this MSP is paid and declared by the central government. And so at the first stage, the ownership to the grains is acquired by an agency of central government. But we know that they have to end up in the hands of beneficiaries. And so it is important for them to be acquired by the state governments. And that is the second stage of this long chain of events. So in the second stage, the food grains are allocated to the states depending upon the number of beneficiaries that they have in their respective states. Now the question is, does FCI charges any money from the state governments? And so the answer is yes.
Food Corporation of India is not going to give away the food grains, lakhs and lakhs tons of these food grains for free to state governments, and it charges some amount in return from state governments, which is what is known as CIP, or Central Issue Price, the price at which the food grains are allocated to the states. So now you can clearly see what FCI spends for getting that food grain is MSP, but what it gets in return is CIP. But the grains are still not at the door of beneficiaries, because the grains are still lying in the godowns of the state government, from where they are allocated to the fair price shops. These fair price shops are the last linkage between the state government and the final beneficiary. From here, the beneficiary take up their allocation of food grains at Central Issue Price, exact price which the state had paid to the FCI. And so this is a whole framework through which our public distribution system operates. From this point beyond, if someone asks you what is minimum support price or MSP, and so you are going to confidently say that MSP is a price at which the food grains are bought from farmers, and hence it is the price which is paid to the farmers. It is paid by FCI, but it is recommended by CACP, or Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices, and it is of course declared by central government. Whereas Central Issue Price is a price at which food grains are allocated to states. At the same time, beneficiary also pays Central Issue Price in return of food grains over here. Now there is one more perspective about MSP which you should know, which is that MSP, of course every one of us understands, is about ensuring a minimum support price to farmer, or in other words, ensuring at least some amount of income to the farmers. But at the same time, it is also about the food subsidy burden of the central government. Because higher the MSP, higher is the amount of money which the central government has to invest on acquiring that food grain. Now, whenever we talk about the food subsidy bill of the central government, we always read one thing: it is increasing. It keeps on increasing always. And why is that? Because people will say that FCI is spending MSP, but in return it is getting CIP. And so why is it a burden on central government? And so if you have to calculate food subsidy expenditure of the central government, the first and foremost will be minimum support price, which it gives to the farmers, which is an expenditure. In return, it gets Central Issue Price from the states, which is what they get in return, which is what FCI gets in return. At the same time, there are few other expenses on behalf of the central government. For example, when the food grain is acquired from the farmers, it is kept in godowns and silos, and it is transported to the state governments and their godowns, and all that cost is borne by the central government. So on behalf of the central government, the expenses are MSP plus transportation and storage costs, which is additional cost, and what they are earning in this exchange is Central Issue Price. Now, if you look at the framework which governs our public distribution system at present, which is National Food Security Act or NFSA, the Central Issue Prices have been fixed for a very, very long time. So for example, if you go and check on these prices, the prices of wheat, rice and various other products have been fixed at rupees 1, 2 and 3 and not more than that. Whereas what you read in newspaper is that government has increased MSP. And this happens every harvesting season. And so on one hand, MSP keeps on increasing because the income to the farmer has to increase. On the other hand, CIP remains fixed. So what the central government is spending on food subsidy keeps on increasing because what it is earning is constant and it is very, very small as compared to the MSP. The comparison is right there on your screen, and see how MSP has kept on increasing in past 20 years, whereas CIP is same, and hence the bloating food subsidy expenditure. So now we have understood the framework, but we have still not gone through the legal backing behind this framework. There has to be a legal arrangement which provides for this kind of acquisition, procurement, and then finally giving out these food grains to the beneficiaries. Now, some of you might think that it is dealt by National Food Security Act, but that is not true. Now, the basic framework through which the public distribution system in our country operates is derived from Essential Commodities Act. because Essential Commodities Act 1955 gives the central government powers to do certain special things. Utilizing the provisions of this act, the central government came out with Public Distribution System Control Order 2001, which regulates the prices, cultivation of crops, its storage and distribution, and how it is going to be done. So the basic framework of PDS, the basic framework through this part of the chain operates, is determined by PDSCO 2001 order derived from Essential Commodities Act 1955. Then a very important Supreme Court judgment, PUCL versus Union of India 2001 judgment, under which Supreme Court of India ruled that right to food will be covered under right to life and personal liberty of Article 21. And from other DNS discussions, you might be aware how Supreme Court has from time to time expanded the ambit of Article 21. And this is one such judgment which actually expanded the meaning of life and liberty in our country. And finally, in 2013, the government came up with National Food Security Act, which actually legalized the right to food. Now, what National Food Security Act did was that it converted a very vague and general entitlement of the citizens of our country, backed by an executive order, into a proper statutory right, which was very important. So now, since we are done with the basic framework and we have the clear-cut legal understanding into how this works, it is time for us to explore what are the issues or the challenges which the PDS is facing from the longest time. At the same time, we will not keep ourselves limited to just the issues, and so we are going to deal into the solutions with each problem as well. And so whatever is written in red color is your problem with the PDS. Centralized procurement, government is a major buyer, so issues related to monopolistic tendencies, the changes in the cropping pattern which it has brought in its wake, higher procurements than needed, which then leads to lack of storage spaces, and then finally challenges with the distribution system. So these are the major challenges which the PDS is facing as of right now. And so let us now start with the problem number 1, which is centralized procurement. So currently the procurement is centralized in the sense that almost all the grain currently is acquired on MSP by the Food Corporation of India, or in other words, the central government. And so there is no role for states or state governments in the way the grains are being procured. And this of course leads to very high transportation costs. And now the question is, why does centralized procurement leads to higher transportation costs? Now you have to understand that when the FCI acquires food grain from a particular area or a district, it goes to the central storage facility of FCI. But in the same area, there are poor people who are going to get the grain back as well. And so this, you can see, is unnecessary transport of grain from point A to B and then back to point A, which then of course results in very high transportation cost. It's just not us, government has also realized this problem, and so it has come up with decentralized procurement system, under which the central government has actually delegated the power of procurement to a lot of state governments, where they can acquire the food grains on their own and the central government is there to watch their backs. And the next important problem is a major problem, and that is a problem in all those commodities and markets where there is a single major player. In this case, it's Government of India, because Government of India is the major buyer in food grain market. And more often than not, the MSP which the government offers to the farmers is way higher than the prevailing market prices, which of course motivates the farmers to sell almost all the food grains, or at least try for it, to the Food Corporation of India, rather than selling it into the open market, which then results in artificial scarcity of those food grains. And for that, Government of India has come up with Open Market Sales Scheme and Price Stabilization Fund. Now, under the Open Market Sales Scheme, whatever excess the Food Corporation of India has procured in a particular financial year is sold in the open market at the prevailing prices. which then of course increases the supply of these food grains, reducing their prices in the market. Whereas price stabilization fund is a fund which will be utilized when the prices of certain commodity or agriculture commodity for which the MSP is given has gone down. So the government utilizes that fund to acquire or procure extra grain from the market. This acquisition on behalf of the government increases the demand and hence the prices. Now currently, the food grains like rice and wheat are not covered under price stabilization fund, but there is a recommendation to include rice and wheat also under this price stabilization fund regime. Then the next problem which the PDS has brought in its wake is that it has induced monoculture or cropping or cultivation of single variety of food grain in a large area. So it has impacted the cropping pattern in our country. And the obvious reason is that farmers are more likely to take up only those food grains and crops for which they can be assured of assured return, which is MSP. And so, due to the MSP regime, due to the PDS, all those crops for which the MSP is not offered have actually gone out of cropping pattern. As a result of the reforms, the government of India has now tried to include more and more crops under the MSP regime so that more and more crops can get equal treatment as far as the prices are concerned and they do not go out of cropping pattern. Then the next problem with the way PDS functions is a higher procurement, higher than what is needed, which then leads to buildup of massive stocks in the godowns of Food Corporation of India. And the reason behind that is open-ended procurement policy of the government of India. Now what open-ended procurement policy does is that it makes it an obligation on behalf of Food Corporation of India to buy all those food crops for which the government releases MSP if a farmer approaches. It doesn't matter what the target is. It doesn't matter how much they have acquired, but if a farmer comes at the gate of the godowns of Food Corporation of India with, let's say, a bag of rice, they have to acquire it, and this is what it leads to the massive buildup of the stocks in the godowns. And so there has been a growing demand to scrap this open-ended procurement policy. So we have understood that there are higher procurement which leads to massive stocks. This buildup of massive stocks create the problem of lack of storage space. And this obviously results in wastage because there is not enough space in the godowns of Food Corporation of India. And even if there is a space, after all, it is a government company which does not store the food grains in the most scientific way in which they should be stored, which then results in rotting. And for exactly this, the government of India has come up with private entrepreneurs guarantee scheme, under which the government of India is incentivizing entrepreneurs to come up with godowns, technologically advanced godowns in rural areas. They are being provided with various kinds of incentives to set up godowns. Now what this is going to do is that first, FCI is going to store the food grains very safely and securely in these godowns. The creation of these godowns in turn is going to have multiplier effect in the areas surrounding, not just creating employment but also enhancing the infrastructure of our rural areas. And then finally, the problem is at the distribution level, the last mile delivery, the point from where the food grain is actually distributed from fair price shops to the final beneficiary. And you must have read in the newspaper about how the people who are entitled are not getting the food grains, which is called exclusion error, because they were wrongly excluded from the list of people who are supposed to get the food grains. Whereas there are a lot of people who get the food grains, but they were not entitled for that, which is called inclusion error. They were wrongly included into the list. And our PDS system has both kinds of error, which is not what we want. Because in both the cases, the food subsidy and the benefits is ending up with the wrong person. In one case, the right person is not getting it, and in the second case, the wrong person is getting it. Now in this regard, the government of India has already started the work where they have tried to do end-to-end computerization of the whole PDS supply chain. But still, there is a need for online allocation of food grains, digitization of ration cards, and not just digitization, there is a need of complete seeding of these ration cards with Aadhaar. Also, It is time for us to think creatively as far as subsidy and food subsidy transfer is concerned. There is a need for the government to explore direct benefit transfer or DBT for food subsidy. For example, instead of giving the food, equal amount of cash can be transferred into the beneficiary's account. It has been tried, but it has its associated challenges with it. Then we know that government is already implementing one nation, one ration card, so that when a person migrates from one locality or one state to another, she is not deprived of her right to food. Ceasefire with NSCN-K Nikki Group. NSCN or National Socialist Council of Nagaland Khaplang Group, and the subgroup of that would be Nikki Group. So the union government yesterday entered into 1 year ceasefire agreement with this group, where more than 200 cadres of the outfit with 83 weapons have joined the peace process. Now, Naga insurgency has been one of the most long-lasting and very effective insurgency out of all the other troubled areas in our country. If you look into UPSC syllabus, it directly maps with the security issues related to India and border management because Nagaland shares the border with Myanmar. Not just the border. The tribes, the Naga tribes, a lot of them share historical ties with the tribes across the border. So the Naga problem is just not a security issue. It also directly correlates with the issues and challenges related to federalism. Because there are a lot of insurgent groups, not all of them demand complete independence from India. Some of them want to rework the arrangement of federalism that they have with Delhi. And so in this regard, a lot of the aspirants, when they enter into the preparation, they do not understand what the Naga problem is, from where did it come about. And so it becomes important for us to understand the historical context of the Naga problem and how it has evolved since then, and what revocation of special status of Jammu and Kashmir, that is Article 370, has actually done to the Naga peace process. Let us now begin the discussion. To begin with the Naga people. Now, Naga people are various ethnic groups native to northeastern part of the country as well as northwestern parts of Myanmar. In our country, their population is scattered across various states. Obviously, their highest concentration is in Nagaland, but also across various districts of Manipur, Assam, and Arunachal Pradesh. Now, the first thing which you should know is that Naga is not a particular tribe. It is a group of a lot of tribes who are together known as Naga tribes. And their concentration is spread across the international border of India and Myanmar. And as far as its relationship with Indian Federation is concerned, it is governed and modified by Article 371A. Now, the provisions of the Article 371A are important to keep in mind, which first and foremost gives preeminent position to the Legislative Assembly of the state. Because no legislation enacted by the Parliament in certain areas like interfering with the religious practices or social practices or Naga customary law or administration of civil or criminal justice and a lot of other matters, laws made by the Parliament would not be applicable to the state of Nagaland unless and until they are approved by the Legislative Assembly. Also, the governor in this case has been given special responsibilities with respect to the law and order in the state as well. And this is exactly the provision which the governor is referring to when he is trying to usurp the such powers. So these are the two things which make Nagaland very special. But it became special because of a special and a particular historical context. And that is in 1881, British annexed the Naga Hills, before which in 1826 they obviously had annexed the northeastern region and especially Assam. 50 years later, they went on to annex the Naga Hills as well. Now, the first sign of sub-nationalism was shown in 1918 when a Naga club was established, which acted as the representative of the Naga tribes in Simon Commission as well. If you remember the Simon Commission, it was sent to review the functioning of which particular act you should comment. And in that particular commission, the Naga groups were represented by the Naga clubs. And in 1929, the representatives of the Naga famously stated that leave us alone to determine our own fate and our own actions just like our ancient times. Now, just before the Indian independence, that is in 1946, an organization known by the name of Naga National Council had come into existence under the leadership of Mr. Angami Zapu Fizo, a very prominent person in Indian history. Now, the organization led by him, that is Naga National Council, declared Naga territories to be independent on the eve of Indian independence. And they resolved to establish a sovereign Naga state and also conducted a referendum in 1951 in which around 99% supported the independent Nagaland. But obviously, the government of India did not agree to such unilateral declaration of independence, and under the leadership of Mr. Fizo, Nagas established a federal government and also established their own army to fight their cause, the repercussions of which are still being seen 70 years later. Then post-independence, the Naga insurgency had been marked with a lot of mergers, splits, factions and everything, and we don't have to go into those details. But what we have to know is an organization named by NSCN-IM, or National Socialist Council of Nagaland, led by two people known as Isaac and Muiva, and hence the acronym. And reading about them is important because this is the organization with which the government of India is currently negotiating the agreement of Naga peace process. Why government of India is negotiating with IM? Because it has become the dominant insurgent group in the Naga insurgency. And also it has signed peace or ceasefire agreement. And since then, it has not violated that ceasefire agreement. So it shows that it's a very, very credible and a responsible organization. Now, as far as the main demands of NSC and IM is concerned, they mainly deal with two issues. Now, the number one is that we should recognize the unique history of Nagas. They are specifically against writing any kind of history which shows Naga as offshoot of some Indian population like that. And the second important demand, or you can say as the main agenda, is the creation of Greater Naga territorial unification. Now, if you recall the introduction, we saw how Naga tribes are distributed in various districts of Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, as well as in Assam. And hence, this particular organization talks about creation of a greater Nagalim, or an area which will encompass all these districts under the territory of Naga state ruled by Nagas. So as far as the creation of factions and one faction becoming more important than the other is concerned, we have understood their two demands. And finally, in 1997, this particular group headed by Isaac and Muiva entered into ceasefire agreement in 1997 with Indian government. Now it is important to understand the terms of the treaty in order to understand the current trouble. Now, as far as the provisions were concerned, the insurgents of NSC and IM were granted immunity, which means the actions or the crimes which they have committed so far shall not be penalized. And there was cessation of offensive on both the sides, which means neither the Indian government nor the NSCN cadres will carry out raid against each other. And there was also cessation of forcible tax collection. Now focus on the term forcible. When these insurgent groups signed that they will not force, but which means that the tax collection by NSCN cadres is legal. What is illegal is forcible. So we have depleted the immunity by signing this contract because we have given the power to other authority to collect tax simultaneously. And as you know, this is not possible in any other state. So as a consequence, the credibility of local politicians who were involved in the democratic process of our Indian system or the framework which Indian constitution has laid down, their credibility was depleted hugely because they were not at all involved in this peace talks. It was a big setback to these local politicians. And another major blow to India's sovereignty was that it lost the control. And especially the security forces of Indian nation lost the ability to dominate a particular area, especially the Nagaland. And hence, the kind of law and order situation which the governor is talking right now has its genesis in 1997 Peace Accord. Finally, moving on to the framework agreement in 2015, which was signed between the government of India and NSC and IM representatives. Now, so far there are no details in the public domain, but whatever we know about this was revealed by Mr. R.N. Ravi to Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs, in which he agreed that in 2015 the government of India has agreed to the recognition of uniqueness of Naga history. So one of the demands of INSC and IN has been met. Then the boundaries of the state shall not be touched So the government of India, it seems, has made it clear that there is no going to be tampering as far as the surrounding states are concerned. So the main demand of NSC and IM has not been met in the 2015 framework, according to R.N. Ravi. We don't know what exactly is the case, but what he has revealed to Parliamentary Standing Committee is the Indian state has not agreed to such a demand. And for that, they have evolved a special arrangement that would be made for Naga areas wherever they reside. So, for example, if there is a village of Naga people in Manipur, that particular region or that particular village shall be given some special powers. Either they will be made more autonomous, or the control of Manipur government on that Manipuri village could be reduced. We don't know what the mechanism is. There were agreement on special arrangements. We don't know what these special arrangements are. Now the question arises that when 2015 framework agreement was signed, then why is there a panic and sudden rise in violence and tax collection in Nagaland? And that is because of the recent revocation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, which has created a kind of panic in other insurgent groups as well. But at the same time, you should also understand that for Naga insurgents to go beyond a particular cutoff or a threshold is not at all feasible right now, because the circumstances in which Mr. Fizo or Mr. Isaac and Moiva carried out their insurgent movements were very different. The context and the situations have changed, as indicated by reduction in violence, and this is a continuous trend in last 2 decades. The extension of ceasefire agreement indefinitely, and continuation of peace talks. So there is a continuous interaction between insurgent groups as well as the central government, and all the successive prime ministers have provided their support to this particular cause. So which shows a broad agreement from both the sides towards a peaceful resolution. Also, as far as the perception of Naga people is concerned, right now they understand the challenges which they will have to face once they move on the steps of Jammu and Kashmir or any other state. Also, they are seeing the kind of progress Mizoram has made once all the insurgents laid down their arms. And another reason why Naga people in majority are not willing to go for the independence of the state is because they have seen the insurgents and their actions in past 2 decades. There has been increase in tax collections and forcible tax collections, and also the intimidations. So Naga people also do not have a very positive image of these insurgent groups. Also, as far as the leadership of these insurgent groups are concerned, their top leadership is either very old or most of the people have passed away. Whereas the people who are taking these positions or the second rung leaders have a low stature. They are not very prominent people in the Naga society, and hence, even if they try to break the ceasefire agreement or try to start the insurgency movement, there are hardly any supporter left for them. Now, and as far as the support for these insurgents movement from Myanmar and Bangladesh is concerned, current safe harbor have been ended by both these governments because they are supportive to India. The only option left for the Naga insurgents is to continue the peace talks and try to resolve their contention within the framework of Indian Constitution. Cabinet approves incentive scheme for textile sector. So the Union Cabinet yesterday has cleared an outlay of 10,000 crores on a production link incentive scheme aimed at attracting fresh investment in the textile sector. Now, textile sector overall adds a lot of value to our economy. At the same time, it provides a lot of people employment opportunities. And hence, it becomes very, very important for us to cover this production link incentive scheme, what it entails, and what are the challenges in this scheme from the perspective of GS Paper 3. So what is production link incentive scheme? So as the name suggests, it is a scheme that aims to give companies incentive on incremental sales from products manufactured in domestic units. The scheme invites foreign companies to set up units in India. However, at the same time, it also aims to encourage local companies to set up or expand existing manufacturing units, and also to generate more employment and cut down countries' reliance on imports from other countries. It was launched in April 2020 for the large-scale electronics manufacturing sector, but later towards the end of 2020, it was introduced in 10 other sectors. This scheme has been introduced in line with India's Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign. The scheme will be implemented by concerned ministries and departments and will be within overall financial limits prescribed. The final proposals of PLI for individual sectors will be appraised by Expenditure Finance Committee and approved by the Cabinet. If there are any savings from one PLI scheme of an approved sector, that can be utilized to fund PLI scheme of other sectors. The PLI scheme across these 10 specific sectors will make Indian manufacturing globally competitive, attract investment in the areas of core competency and cutting-edge technology, ensure efficiencies, create economies of scale, enhance exports, and make India an integral part of global supply chain. So what are these sectors in which the government of India has approved PLI schemes? So as we have discussed so far, there are 10 sectors: advanced chemistry, cell battery, electronics technology products, automobile and auto components, pharmaceutical and drugs, telecom and networking products, textile products, food products, high efficiency solar PV modules, white goods and specialty steel. And you can see that the implementing ministry and department is very obvious to guess. For example, the PLI for pharmaceutical drugs will be managed by Department of Pharmaceuticals. Similarly, Department of Telecom will be responsible for PLI scheme in telecom and network products. So what is the objective that we are trying to achieve over here? First and foremost, we want to attract FDI in Indian manufacturing sector, which will generate employment in rural India. Because under the PLI scheme, the priority would be given for investment in aspirational districts, tier 3 and tier 4 towns and rural areas. And hence it will improve India's ability to compete in global textile markets. It will promote Make in India program and will provide push to MSME sector. It will promote entrepreneurship in technical textile sector. It will promote textile exports from India. 2/3 of India's textile exports now are cotton based, whereas 66 to 70% of the world trade in textiles and apparel is MMF based and technical textiles. MMF here means man-made fiber. Then it will help us in utilizing excess supply of raw material, and it will encourage investment in new capacities in man-made fiber apparel. So what is the need for PLI scheme? The government has expanded the PLI scheme for fulfilling various needs in manufacturing sector. For example, it provides enough support to sunrise industries at their initial level. These are the industries that are relatively new but are growing at a very rapid rate. These are expected to become important industries in the future. For example, solar energy, food processing industry. At the same time, despite India being a dominating player in services sector, contributes very little to global supply chain. PLI scheme can help India to build an export base. For example, according to the parliamentary report, the minimum production in India due to PLI scheme is expected to be over around $500 in just 5 years from now. Also, at present, there is a growing demand for diversification of supply chains. Countries across the world want to avoid the dominance of China. The PLI scheme, by increasing the production, can fulfill the needs of other countries as well. And finally, it would attract the global investment to India after COVID-19 pandemic. India is a consumer-based economy. By providing incentives, the PLI scheme attracts more foreign investment to India. So what are the challenges associated with PLI schemes? And there are 4 major challenges which we can identify as of now. First is that the scheme contains a financial cap on incentive, which is the maximum limit a person can take advantage of the limit. This makes an overperforming company not to reap the benefits of its overachievement. Since there is a cap, the businessman might not be motivated enough to do beyond what is capped under the scheme. Then, in India, for the majority of PLI scheme focused sectors, the effective cost of manufacturing is higher than its competitor. For example, according to a survey by Ernst & Young, if the cost of production of one mobile is rupees 100, then the effective cost of manufacturing the same phone is 79.55 rupees in China, 89 rupees in Vietnam, and 92.51 rupees in India, including PLI. So the investors will still prefer other countries despite PLI scheme. So you can say that PLI kind of incentivization is not sufficient enough to bring or attract the global manufacturing into India. Apart from that, the scheme does not addresses the core challenge faced by the sunrise industry. Because first and foremost, in the sunrise sector, the key players are foreign companies, even in India. And so the scheme is going to benefit international players more than the domestic firms, since they are also a beneficiary of this scheme. It does not distinguish between foreign and domestic players. as the international player can invest their revenues and produce in India and take the domestic market share. Thus, the domestic manufacturer will be in disadvantaged position. For example, about 99% of the Xiaomi phones sold in India were made in India. So Indian firms might face the challenge and strict competition from the foreign players. Second, the problem of cheap imported material. Domestic firms may also face competition from cheap imports, especially from Chinese in solar PV modules and white goods. Then we don't have cutting edge technology and foundries because India has not focused enough on R&D and raw machinery. This has resulted in poor talent retention and eventually brain drain, and so the development of industries under PLI scheme is quite questionable. And then finally, the challenge from World Trade Organization. In September 2019, Chinese Taipei contested the raise in tariffs under phased manufacturing program. If PMP is found to be WTO non-compliant, then the growth of domestic industries will be stunted. So what we can do to amend these challenges? First, we should focus on supply chain co-location. The government has to encourage the foreign firms under PLI policy to co-locate, which means that the placement of several entities in a common and single location with their established industrial ecosystem. This will reduce government expenditure to invest and develop the ecosystems for the investor. This will bring the assemblers and component manufacturers together at one place, so that it reduces the effective cost of manufacturing. Further, the government must also focus on service industry at the same time, as other countries like China focus on development of both manufacture and service sectors simultaneously in long term. Then India also needs to focus on other key challenges of the manufacturing sector through incentives like reduction in costs, encouraging states to be competitive and not indulge in trade restrictive practices like job reservation for locals, implementing structural reforms such as land reforms. At the same time, India needs to improve human capital to meet the demands of the sunrise industries. Then finally, we should take advantage of anti-Chinese sentiments in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. The global players including the USA, Australia aim to diversify their supply chains and also raise allegations against China. India should utilize this golden opportunity to act fast to attract outgoing investment from China. Then this last article for today's discussion, Green Hydrogen, a new ally for zero carbon future, appears on editorial page, which talks about hydrogen fuel and the obstacle in the way of fully adopting this fuel as the future. Now we know that under GS paper 3, awareness in the field of IT, space, computers, nanotechnology, biotechnology is an important part of the syllabus. The same line of the syllabus also covers the emerging technology. And in this era when we are trying to fight the climate change, hydrogen fuel is one of the best technologies we can bet upon. According to International Renewable Energy Agency, hydrogen will make up around 12% of the energy mix by 2050. The agency in its World Energy Transition Outlook report also suggested that about 66% of this hydrogen used must come from water instead of natural gas. So hydrogen fuel is zero carbon fuel burned with oxygen, because when it's combined with oxygen it produces water, and so it is the most clean fuel which you can think of, provided the hydrogen which you are using has been derived or created in a zero carbon way, and we will get to it how. But it is a very energy rich source. Hydrogen is the most abundant element on the planet, but it's not found in pure, which is required to be used as fuel. It has an energy density almost 3 times that of diesel. It is a rich source of energy, but the challenge is to compress it or liquefy it. It needs to be kept at stable minus 253 degrees Celsius, far below the temperature of minus 163 at which liquefied natural gas or LNG is stored, making its prior to use cost very high. Hydrogen has the potential to be the key renewable target in supporting infrastructure as well. And green hydrogen, in which the hydrogen is derived from zero carbon sources, would be essential to meet the requirements of renewable energy in the future. So when we say green hydrogen, what are the other kinds of hydrogen that we can think of? So there are various kinds of hydrogen: black hydrogen, brown hydrogen, grey hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and of course green hydrogen, depending upon the source of hydrogen. So black hydrogen is produced by using fossil fuel, whereas pink hydrogen is produced through electrolysis, using energy from nuclear power sources. So there is no carbon involved over there. whereas brown hydrogen is produced using coal, where the emissions are released to the air, so it's not zero emission. Similarly, grey hydrogen is produced from natural gas, where the associated emissions are released to the air. Blue hydrogen is produced from natural gas, where the emissions are captured using carbon capture and storage. And finally, our precious green hydrogen is a zero carbon fuel made by electrolysis using renewable power from wind and solar to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. The green hydrogen can be utilized for the generation of power from natural sources, wind or solar systems, and will be a major step forward in achieving the target of net zero emissions. Less than 1% of the hydrogen produced is green hydrogen. So the major obstacle is the obstacle of cost. The production cost of green hydrogen has been considered to be prime obstacle. According to studies by International Renewable Energy Agency, the production cost of this green source of energy is expected to be around $1.5 per kilogram. So it's very, very expensive. Then manufacturing and deployment of electrolyzers will have to increase at an unprecedented rate by 2050, from the current capacity of 0.3 gigawatts to almost 5,000 gigawatts. For transportation of fuel cells, hydrogen must be cost competitive and conventional fuels and technologies on a per mile basis. And then finally, fuel cells which convert hydrogen fuel to usable energy for cars are still expensive. The hydrogen station infrastructure needed to refuel hydrogen fuel cell cars is still widely underdeveloped. So what are the benefits of using green hydrogen for India? We know India is the world's fourth largest energy consuming country behind China, US and EU. According to IAS forecast, India will overtake European Union to become world's third energy consumer by the year 2030. Green hydrogen therefore can provide India's transition to clean energy and also help it combat climate change. We know that under Paris Climate Agreement, India has pledged to reduce the emission intensity to its economy by 33 to 35% as compared to 2005 level by 2030. It will reduce import dependency on fossil fuels. The localization of electrolyzer production and development of green hydrogen projects can create a new green technologies market in India. At the same time, India is also gradually unveiling its plans. The Indian Railways have announced the country's first experiment of hydrogen fuel cell technology-based train by retrofitting an existing diesel engine. The Union Budget of 2021-22 has announced National Hydrogen Energy Mission that will draw up a roadmap for using hydrogen as an energy source. So you can see a lot of ramifications emerging out of green hydrogen use. But that is all contingent upon the way India decides to invest itself in this technology. Let us now look at the question of the day.